Hello, I'm Dan Moyane. Welcome to hashtag Connect Africa Moyane, where we seek to enrich people's minds by sharing African experiences and stories that hopefully can contribute to a transforming continent. I'm talking to Thebe Ikalafeng. Now, to many of you, you might have heard the name, but others might not have heard the name. To me, he represents what is best when it comes to marketing in Africa, when it comes to the brand Africa itself. And I always wonder what made him focus so much on improving the image or the brand image of our continent. Thebe, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dan.
I've always wondered why focus all your energy on the continent?
Because it's the only place that I know well, and it's a place that has created me. And I think it's maybe what Fela Kuti said one day, that when you're out in the world, when they look at you as a person of color, they only see an African. So I cannot run away from who I am. So the best thing that I can do is to make where I am stand out and be a best representative of it.
You've traveled to each and every country in Africa. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say I haven't even visited half the continent, but you've been to every single country in Africa. What made you decide to spend so much time everywhere on our continent?
So a few years ago, many years ago, I'd gone to a meeting with the chief executive of Samsung, a Korean man, and he was based in South Africa, but he was from Korea. And I was speaking to him, and he was speaking about, I said to him, why are you so successful in the continent? And he said to me, because I've been to every country in the continent. He says, I have seen how they live. I have seen how our products work there. And he says to me, when the lights went down, I didn't look at them as primitive. I looked at it as an opportunity for our solar-based products. And I said, oh my goodness, he's right. So he's been everywhere I've been. But even further back, 2003, I think, then President Thabo Mbeki addressed the Indaba, the tourism Indaba in Durban. And he spoke so beautifully about if he could take time away from his time as a president of the Republic, he would travel the continent. And he was talking about what he would do in Ngorongoro Crater, what he would do tracing Sarah Bartman's heritage, where he would go. And I was saying, my goodness, I'm listening to this beauty of how lyrically he speaks about the continent. And I said, and all these are here in the continent, and I've never heard of them. So those two experiences, or not mine, those two experiences of somebody else, I looked at him and I said, so what gives me the right to say I am an African when I only know where I live? At that stage, I think I'd only been to about 10 or 12 countries. And I said to myself, I need to know a little bit more about the countries before I can say I'm an African properly.
Now, you learn from different experiences. And that is why I want to talk to you, because I think it's important that one contributes to a transforming continent. I think your experience would prove that the continent is transforming, is it?
Oh, what an amazing continent. I think, and I like to use not the glitzy side of the continent, because everywhere when I go into the continent, I really don't want to highlight the tall buildings, I don't want to highlight the shiny buildings. I want to highlight how Africans are using their own resources and their own intellect and ability to make things happen. And specifically, doesn't mean there's a few examples, but the one example that stands out so much to me is I'd landed in Senegal, in Dakar, and I drove at about 2 a.m. and we drove to the border of the Gambia. And when we arrived at the border of the Gambia, it was about 4 or 5 in the morning. And so it means the border just opened. As the border opened, they said, oh, you cannot go across with your car. We rented a car. We rented a driver and the car. I said, why? It says, because you don't have insurance. So we don't have insurance. I said, but we've got insurance here. He says, but not for the Gambia. It's another country. So I said, where are we going to get insurance at 5 in the morning? There was a guy who was standing right next to us. He says, no problem. Let me deal with that. He says, he took me and another friend. He says, come with me. Took our car. We went to a place about maybe 5-10 minutes away. It was dark as hell. And I saw people with torches writing policies down. And I said, what's happening? He says, they're writing policies. And I said, are they legitimate? He says, of course they're legitimate. So, and at 5:30 in the morning, we got our policy. And I reinforced something important about our continent, that this is a can-do continent. It's people who are very entrepreneurial. Because what this man had done, he decided to buy in advance policies for people like us. To ensure that when we land at that time, he can write up the policies for us. So to me, it spoke about the entrepreneurial energy of the continent, because that entrepreneurial energy is what's going to transform the continent, because it means that we're a people that can do and can make things happen.
We can make things happen, but a few years ago, there was this slogan, "This is Africa's time." And after some time, people were saying, but Africa's time has always been there. We have a can-do attitude, as this example that took place at the board of Senegal and the Gambia you're sharing with us around insurance. But why is it like that we're not making the progress at a pace that will really catapult us to stardom, so to speak?
Because I think it's a balance of two things. On the one hand, if you come to a country, for example, like South Africa, there's a lot of dependency on the state. There's a lot of dependency and waiting for the country will do this for me before I can do that. And then if you come to the other countries outside of South Africa, you find out that they've been burdened by a lot of debt, they've been burdened a lot of aid, and they've been turned into quote unquote beggars rather than creators. Notwithstanding the fact that on our own we are very creative people and we can make things happen. So I think the reason we are not breaking through is because for a long time we waited for somebody to do something for us. Whether in the South African example, as I say, maybe the SADC rather example, it's for the state to do something for me. And beyond SADC is for perhaps somebody outside to do something. If you look at the Francophone, it's for France to do something for me. If you look at the Northern Anglophone, it's for the aid companies to do something for me. But that's changing a lot. I think you've got a lot of examples of how that is changing. When you go to a country like Kenya, you look at how Kenya created M-Pesa, the product, the mobile money transfer solution. That is the most admired and most quoted and most copied mobile money transfer in the world. The number of transactions that go through M-Pesa are greater than all the transactions worldwide. Not only that, about 50 to 70% of the economy of Kenya goes through M-Pesa. So it shows you that even that African countries can create those type of solutions. I mean, similarly, I was in Somalia. I was in Mogadishu, and the driver stopped the car. Security stopped the car, and the security leaned over to the driver and says, "Can I have money for a cigarette?" Just like you buy a cigarette, like a loose draw, we call it in South Africa, just a single cigarette. And the guy says, "Sure, what's your number?" And he took his phone and he dialed and says, "Sharp later." So I said to him, "What just happened?" He says, "Oh, I just gave him money for the cigarette." I said, "Mobile?" He says, "Yes, 95% of our transactions are all on mobile." I said, interesting, because when you don't know the countries, you haven't traveled the countries, you think all that happens in Somalia is just war. But what happens is there's a lot of creative and innovations, innovative problem solutions.
And I think there'll be many examples on our continent where we innovate. I mean,
correct.
We've produced brilliant scientists.
Indeed.
We have many firsts when it comes to the medical field.
Indeed.
And I'm just wondering, with COVID-19, as the world is grappling with this, and we are sort of participating at the periphery of the production of vaccines, why is it that we as Africans are not driving some of that post-COVID-19 world?
Because again, it goes back to the same bigger African problem. We are waiting for somebody to solve our problems. So if you look at all the African countries, many of the African countries, or the African Union, they've never said, let us drive the development of a vaccine for Africa. They have said, we're going to make an application to Europe or to America or to Asia.
Or to World Health Organization.
Or to World Health Organization to participate in their vaccination program. Whereas the people in the UK, they created their own. Russia, they created their own. China, they created their own. America is driving their own. So we should have actually shown African leadership. But again, you know, and I may link this with the earlier question you asked in terms of why we're really not breaking through. I think the other good reason why we're not breaking through, other than the fact that we're waiting for somebody to do something, is because a lot of the times we've got the wrong people leading us. And as a result, they are not leading us, they are misleading us, and they are regressing our progress. Because many of the people that we put in power more often than not are thinking for themselves and not are thinking for the greater good of the continent.
And this continent is full of youthful energy.
Oh, but
It's full of young people.
well, I think
But
about
it's led
two-thirds,
by
yes.
it's led by old people.
How crazy is that? I think 60 to 7% of the continent is under the age of 30, but probably 60 to 70% of the leaders are over 70 or maybe over 60.
That
That's
can't
a
be right.
problem.
That can't be right.
It can't be right because a lot of the people who are leading us in that age group are people from quote unquote the liberation era. If you will, the liberation movement era.
The struggle
And
heroes.
the struggle heroes. And a lot of the times, to them, this is payback time. You are paying me back for the struggles and the suffering that I've done. Instead of looking at it and saying that, you know what, maybe I can carry this journey for a bit, but let me partner with the young people whom I'm going to leave behind. You know, there was an African Union meeting many years ago, and the late Sata from Zambia was going to address a bunch of youth, African Union youth, and he was quite late for the meeting. And when he arrived at the meeting, and he said, hurry, we need to get going. They said, the youth looked at him and says, what do you mean you need to hurry? This is, it's not even your time. This is our time. We are going to be here long after you'd left. So don't hurry us. What you need to do is you should have been on time and listen to us because we are going to inherit this continent.
That kind of spirit we need more of today, I would argue, from our young people. From your travels, just generally, have you noticed that enthusiasm and that energy by spirited young people to say, no, it's our time, we are the future here?
You know, what has helped this continent is technology, is mobile. Because what technology or mobile has done is it has obliterated borders. And as a result of obliterating borders, it has empowered the young people to communicate and to express themselves, sometimes anonymously, sometimes for the right reason, sometimes for the wrong reason. But what it has done is it has fired that enthusiasm, that energy to say, to express themselves to the leaders, whether it is the issues with SARS in Nigeria recently, as you've seen, that the young people were out there and talking and using media, or whether it's how in Egypt, rather the Arab Spring, what caused it. Remember what not what caused it, but rather what brought down those liberation leaders was the power of technology. How they used the Facebooks, how they used Twitter to mobilize and to bring them. So of course, yes, across the continent there is that spirit, and that spirit comes from the power that technology has enabled them. But the problem that unfortunately that the youth have is they are generally always met with the return force, and as a result, that's the one thing that dampens their spirit. But the second, probably biggest problem about our continent is we have very short attention span. We get excited about a problem for 1-2 months, and then we chill, and then we move on to the next one. So instead of, we don't see things through. What the young people need, and they probably should have had, was the same spirit and the resilience that the liberation fighters had, which is they stayed the course until victory.
Yeah. When you hear commentators talk about our continent, I mean, you and I are Southern Africans. We belong to the Southern African region by birth, and we were bred here. You look at East African countries, they'll have a certain set of approaches. West Africa, Central Africa, and right to the Maghreb, you know, the northern part of the continent. But you get a sense that people say, no, but you guys are stuck. You always, like you say, you've got a short attention span, but other commentators say, no, but you are stuck. You seem to be stuck in a particular way of looking at the world. I saw a video recently of the Ghanaian president, Nana Akufo-Addo. He just won the election again recently in Ghana, where he was saying, if you look at the African diaspora globally, it's tied to the continent. So wherever you are, if you're black, you are African. And we have these intellectuals, these highly qualified people spread all over the world. And when they come back and they are asked to come back to their countries, they come back, they are made promises, but then we get the same old ways. Nothing is delivered. Why does it seem like we're stuck?
Because again, the people that we've got who are supposed to open the ways for us are the very same people who on the public platforms, they say, come back, the continent is open, come and help us rebuild this continent. But as soon as you are there, they see your vocal approach, they see your ideas as challenging their leadership. So the people who seem to thrive are the ones who stay away from the politics. Because with us as well, once we arrive in these positions, we now begin to think of ourselves, maybe I can be president. So now we start threatening these people, or maybe I'm better than the president. Then we start threatening these people. But I mean, there are many countries though. I mean, if look at Rwanda as an example. Rwanda is a beautiful country in terms of the ability of a country to have the most important thing that we all need in this continent, in every country, which is vision. I mean, what Paul Kagame at least has done is he's got a vision for the country. But not only does he have a vision for the country, because all of us write beautiful visions. What he also does have, he's got a plan, and he puts a plan in action. And that's why you begin to see a country of 12 or so many millions is the fastest growing, one of the fastest growing economies. It's quick to start a business there. I think less than 24 hours you can set up a business, and it's positioning itself to be the tech center of the continent.
It's down to leadership.
It's down to leadership. We have I think it's Salif Johnson, Salif Johnson from former president of Liberia. And said our continent is not poor. Our continent is poorly led. So what we lack in this continent is leadership.
Okay, I want to now come to your travels. Because if we talk about poorly led continent, you might have witnessed interesting things as you are traveling around. We are Southern Africans, as I said earlier, and you've been everywhere. Okay, if you look at the blocks, let's just call them the regional blocks. You've got Southern Africa, you've got East Africa, and the Horn of Africa there. You've got Central Africa, you've got West Africa, and then you've got the fifth one, the Maghreb region, the North African. If you look at them today, and you are thinking, how would you rate them? Which would be the best region for you?
Interesting question. I think East Africa may be a better region in the continent. Maybe a better region because you've got countries, because if you look at, so every year I conduct Brand Africa 100, Africa's best brands. And for some reason, some of the brands that we absolutely admire, that shows African innovation and all those, come from East Africa. Whether I've spoken about Safaricom, Besa in Kenya, whether you look at in Azam in Tanzania, whether you look at Trade Kings, so that area, they seem to have a lot of vibrance. But I think what stands out for me about that area actually is what they've chosen to focus their energies on. So Kenya and Rwanda have decided we're going to use technology to drive development.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised to hear a few years ago that the first youth innovation hub was in Nairobi.
They've got that the iHub in Nairobi, and as we're talking, Rwanda is building an innovation center, and they've invited some of the best universities, including an African Leadership University, which was founded by an African from Ghana, Fred Sonega, to be based in there, and they want to position themselves as the tech hub of the continent. So there's probably two ways to maybe let me look at it. Let me look at it differently for you. If you look at the francophone, rather than perhaps, if you look at the francophone unfortunately still have a French hangover, if you will. Because if you go to those countries, many of the brands that are being consumed, many of the ways of life that are dominating are still francophone. I was in Burkina Faso and I saw the kids boycotting in the streets, and I joined them. We were just dancing. So I said, "What are we dancing about?" They're like, "We want to get rid of the CFA." I said, "What?" They said, "We cannot have our fortunes tied up to France." Because unfortunately, when you look at francophone versus anglophone colonial heritages, if you will, is when the French left the countries fell apart. And when the English left the countries, there were some basic institutions that they could build on. So that's the one big macro are different.
I think the Lusophones as well would have fallen under the Francophone type. When the Portuguese left, they didn't leave much behind.
They didn't leave much behind as well, and that's a problem because when you go to those countries, that's one thing. And then what's actually crazy sad about those countries is the pride they take in the former colonial master's language. And I think, Ngugiwa Thiong'o said, if you celebrate somebody else's language and you denigrate yours, it doesn't make you a better person. And a whole lot of us, unfortunately, we forget that the language is the embodiment of everything that we are. It's our culture, it's our heritage, it's our history. And so the Franco versus Anglophone, unfortunately, is the second. So I generally don't say which is better or all those, but in observation, I'd say if you then look at the economic regions, which is where you started. So there's the language regions, then the economic. When you look at the economic regions, when in our study, the Brand Africa 100, I was quite surprised to look at when the biggest developments of brands were in the continent by region. If you look at South Africa, so if you look at the three major countries, South Africa, which is the biggest economy in Southern Africa, you look at Kenya, which is the biggest economy in East Africa, you look at Nigeria, the biggest economy in West Africa. If you look at all those, about 70% of the brands which South Africans admire, which are created in South Africa, were all created before apartheid. So it means that since apartheid, since 1990, we have not really done much. Yes, there's a one or two brands, there's an MTN there, there's a Discovery there, but there's been very little development. So there's been a lot of rather taking and celebrating the past rather than building onto the future. If you go to Kenya and Nigeria, over 80% of the brands that they admire were created after apartheid. So after their colonial emancipation.
Which would be like after 1960 and
so
onwards.
It will be 60 onwards for Nigeria, and it will be 63 onwards for Kenya.
Why would that be? What are you finding when you do your survey? Why would that be?
I guess for South Africa, because South Africa was a pariah, and it was enclosed and it was closed off. South Africa had to fend. The apartheid government had to fend for itself. They had to create for itself. So unfortunately, when we then took over in 1990, we didn't necessarily build on that. We instead started just consuming that which we have, which unfortunately is depleting, as we can see now, because we have not really invested much in terms of education, even infrastructure. We're still eating what we found here, and that's a big problem. In the other country, with their limited resources, they still at least manage to create a lot for themselves. You go to Kenya, I think Kenya, all the street names are Kikuyu names, or at least local languages or local people. If you look at Southern Africa, South Africa and all those, similarly, a lot of what surrounds us is what we found here and less of who we are. So if we're surrounded by what you found here, you won't be able to create much because you're not celebrating much of who you are.
How do we create new experiences that really transform the continent? Because you, with Brand Africa, you founded Brand Africa around about the time that South Africa hosted the FIFA World Cup.
Correct.
In 2010. And that was a wonderful timing and taken from that energy. But you made it continental from this view, which is brilliant. Now, that's an institution that we surely should be proud of, that's growing and growing. And I know you've got other plans from an education side, which we can talk about later. But then that's a new experience that you've created. You're now talking about a Brand Africa 100. That's a new experience that we're creating. That's, in my view, is adding value to Africa's richness, diversity of thought, of experiences. How do we create these new experiences successfully, in your view? I mean, from what you've seen traveling around.
To me, it first starts with a sense of identity. I think what we lack a lot of, especially Southern Africa, we lack a strong sense of who we are and celebrating who we are. So if you don't appreciate who you are, you will not be able to build anything from who you are. So I always tell people that, you cannot try and beat the Italians at being Italian, because they understand what it means. That's why they're so proud to made in Italy, or the French made in France, or the entrepreneurial spirit of America made in America. We know what it means, or the traditions of England made in England. But all those, if you look at, they all start from the same thing, a strong self of identity. So what we need in this continent, and unfortunately, because we really have less than 100 years or post-colonial, post-colonization, we haven't really been able to build a couple of things. One is national identities, and second is Pan-African identity. So the last time, if you look at 1963, or 1963, just before, on the 24th of May, that's the day before the OAU was formed, Kwame Nkrumah put down a 10-point master plan for the continent, of how to create a great continent. So a whole lot of all those things. One of the points was to create an African passport. But an African passport to me was more than just a document. It spoke to a unity of African, being African, speaking from the same point, identifying as
a possible borderless
a possible,
because the borders are colonially set up.
Correct. So it was a foundation for. We still have not implemented that. And now we are over 60 years in our post OAU. We changed to African Union in 2002. So to me, to me, those are some of the challenges that we have in the continent, in terms of, in order to create new experiences, you must first have a great understanding of who you are, because who you are is what is going to distinguish you in the world. You cannot distinguish yourself by identifying with the other outside. And I think I mentioned the point about Fela Kuti one day, and Fela Kuti said, they asked him the question, also with his son at his club, and a couple of years ago, and we're speaking about their names, because Femi, Fela, all those. But Nigerians generally have got local names. But we spoke about that, and I said, and he says his father took great pride in ensuring all his children have got local names. And he says the reason he did that, he said, it doesn't matter where they go in the world, when they do well anywhere else in the world, Nigeria does well, because the credit comes back to Nigeria. They say, Fela Kuti, where is he from? This is a Nigerian name. So that brings back the credit to Africa. So it starts with the self of identity. I mean, the great thinkers, whether it's Mazrui, whether it's Job from Senegal, or whether it is Ngugi from Kenya, all of them, they emphasize the need, and the need to have a strong sense of identity, because that's a foundation for me to create new, distinctive, rich and authentic experiences. Because all that we've been doing then for the last few years, a lot of times, is we are trying to perfect the master's ideas instead of trying to create our ideas, yes, enriched by some of what the master has left behind.
Yes.